I met her the way people meet anyone in this city, by accident, and then not by accident anymore. Most mornings, I'd stop at the cafe across the street from the bus stop. It wasn't anything special. The coffee was burnt half the time, the music too loud. But it was close, and it gave me somewhere to stand other than my own silence. She was always there before me. Sitting by the window, a paperback cracked open. Her reading glasses balanced low like she hadn't decided whether she needed them yet. Mid-40s, maybe. She had that calm, lived-in presence like someone who had stopped caring if people were looking, though I noticed every time. It wasn't the kind of noticing you admit out loud. I'd just catch myself waiting for her to tuck her hair behind her ear, or the way she always circled the rim of her mug before taking the first sip. Small things. Things you only remember if you're paying too much attention. The barista knew me by now, so my drink was usually waiting on the counter. She noticed that too once. "You must come here a lot," she said without looking up from her book. Her voice was soft, casual, like we'd already been in conversation. "Guess so," I said. I didn't know where to put my hands, so I folded the napkin in half. Then again. Then again. Pause stretched, not awkward exactly, but something. She turned a page, then added, "You're too young to already be a creature of habit." I half smiled, not sure if she was teasing or just stating a fact. Maybe I just like things I can count on. That made her glance up at me. Just a flick of her eyes. Nothing in her face gave her away, but the moment stayed with me long after I left. The thing about loneliness is it doesn't always look like sadness. Mine looked like unsent drafts in my phone. A dozen messages started and abandoned. Friends I meant to text back. Girls I thought I might ask out. But the words never made it past my thumb. I'd just stare at the screen until the thought went stale. But her? She was distraction in human form. Not loud. Not flashy. Just enough presence that I'd find myself waiting for the mornings when our timing lined up. Sometimes she'd nod hello. Sometimes nothing at all. I learned she liked her coffee black, no sugar. I learned she always carried 2 pens in her bag, though one never worked. I learned she had a laugh that was quieter than it should have been, like she didn't trust the room to deserve it. And I learned that even on the mornings when we didn't speak, I'd leave the cafe with a sense that something unfinished had followed me out the door. The day it shifted, it was raining. I'd forgotten an umbrella, and so had she. The bus was late, the cafe too crowded. So we both stood under the awning, listening to the downpour drum against the sidewalk. "You live near here?" she asked, hugging her coat closer. "Across the street. Basement apartment." Her head tilted, curiosity, not judgment. "So you're the one with the little light in the window. Always on late." I felt caught. "Yeah, that's me." She nodded, then smiled in this almost secret way. "Good to know who I'm sharing the block with." The rain wasn't letting up, but she stepped closer, like she was about to say more. Then her phone buzzed. She read the screen, tucked it away, and offered me the briefest look. One I still don't know how to name. I thought that was the end of it, until later that night, when my phone lit up with an unknown number. Her. "Your light's on again." She didn't explain how she got my number, and I didn't ask. Maybe that was the point. Some things don't need clarifying if you want them to keep existing. The next morning, she wasn't at the cafe. The seat by the window sat empty, book left behind from the day before. I noticed it right away, though I pretended not to. That night, I was fixing the shower in my apartment when there was a knock. 3 soft raps on the door, not urgent, not casual. She stood there with the paperback in her hand. "You left this," she said, though we both knew it was hers. I wiped my hands on a towel. "Thanks." Instead of leaving, she glanced toward the small kitchenette, the clutter of mismatched mugs on the counter. "You make tea?" "Sometimes." "I'll take sometimes," she said, stepping inside before I found the courage to stop her. She sat at the tiny table while I boiled water, her coat draped over the chair. The space felt smaller with her in it, not crowded but concentrated. "Basement living," she murmured, looking around. "Reminds me of when I first moved out. The ceiling's always too low, the light bulbs too harsh." "You moved out young?" I asked. 17. She traced the rim of the mug I set in front of her. I thought I knew everything. Turns out I just knew how to leave. Her eyes stayed on the steam rising between us. The weight of her honesty sat in the room longer than the words themselves. I wanted to ask more, but all I said was, "That sounds hard." She smiled, small and tired. It was. But then again, everything worth keeping has been. I caught myself staring at her hands as she spoke, noticing the faint calluses near her thumb, the chipped nail polish she hadn't bothered to fix. She noticed too, because she folded them in her lap. A simple move, but one that pressed the airtight between us. That's when it hit me, this was a line. An invisible one. She was mid-40s, divorced. I was barely 22, still figuring out how to pay rent on time. Nothing about this should matter, and yet everything did. I imagined what people would say. What she must have already told herself 100 times. And still, she was sitting here sipping tea that was too weak, in a room that was too small with me. But when she finally stood to leave, the silence followed her to the door. She lingered, holding the book against her chest. "You should fix that shower," she said softly. "Water's important." It wasn't a goodbye, not exactly. She reached out, brushing a loose thread from my sleeve with 2 fingers. An innocent touch, but enough to make my pulse stumble. Then she left. The thread was gone. The warmth stayed. After that night, things shifted in ways I couldn't name. Nothing dramatic. She didn't suddenly show up at my door again. But when we saw each other in passing, her taking out the recycling, me unlocking my mailbox, there was a pause, a wait, like both of us were waiting for the other to acknowledge something that hadn't been said. At the cafe, she returned to her usual seat. She nodded when I came in, almost casual, except her eyes lingered longer than they should have. I felt it, even from across the room. I wanted to sit with her, to let the conversation pick up where it had left off. But my feet stayed glued to the counter. I sat 2 tables away, pretending to scroll my phone. The gap between us was small, but it might as well have been a wall. It wasn't until later that week that the wall cracked again. My shower still sputtered, never fully fixed, so I was crouched under the sink when I heard a knock. This time it wasn't her. It was my friend Ryan, dropping by unannounced. "Basement life treating you good?" he asked, sprawling onto the couch before I could answer. He eyed the second mug drying by the sink, the faint trace of her perfume that still lingered in the air. "You had company?" I swallowed. "Just landlady. She brought something down." He smirked. "She's kinda, you know?" I didn't reply. I tightened the wrench instead, the metal groaning under my grip. Ryan didn't press, but his grin said enough. When he left, the apartment felt smaller, like his suspicion had filled every corner. That night, I saw her outside, setting a potted plant on the stoop. I wanted to say something, to explain what Ryan hadn't even asked, but she looked up before I could and smiled faintly. "Shower still broken?" she asked. "Still leaking," I admitted. She tilted her head. "Want me to take a look?" I laughed softly. "You fix showers now?" "I've lived long enough to learn a few tricks." Inside, the quiet between us thickened as she knelt beside me, her sleeve brushing mine while she tightened the valve. The simple domestic closeness made my chest feel unsteady. "There," she said, testing the faucet. Water sputtered, then steadied. "Not perfect, but better." "Like you said," I murmured. "Everything worth keeping." She froze for half a second, then pulled back, gathering her coat. Something in her eyes dimmed, not unkind but careful, like she'd suddenly remembered the line I kept trying not to see. At the door, she hesitated. I almost thanked her again, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I stepped closer, close enough to notice the faint trace of rain in her hair, the way her breath caught when she realized how near we stood. The silence leaned forward. My hand almost reached for hers. Almost. But then she stepped back, the distance snapping into place like a lock turning. "Good night," she said softly. And that was it. It was late afternoon when I saw her outside, tugging at the latch of her gate. The sky was low and gray, the air sharp with the smell of rain again. She gave up on the latch and sat on the bench in front of her house, brushing her hair back like the day had already worn her down. I almost kept walking. Almost. Instead, I crossed the street. "You okay?" I asked. She glanced up, then back down at the gravel under her shoes. "Gate won't close. Been like this all week." I bent to look at it, more excuse than solution. My hands worked at the rusted hinge, but my attention was on her. The way she leaned forward, elbows on knees, as if she hadn't realized I was watching. After a while, she sighed. "You don't owe me this, you know. Fixing things. Keeping me company." I straightened. "I don't mind." "Maybe that's the problem," she said quietly. We sat on the bench, silence stretching with the clouded sky. Car passed. A dog barked 2 streets over. She shifted, her knee brushing mine for just a second too long before she pulled it back. "I don't know what you see here," she said finally, her voice low, not looking at me. The words caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" She let out a soft laugh, but it sounded tired. "You're 22. Whole life out there waiting. And here I am, divorced, halfway through everything, drinking coffee like it's a lifeline." I wanted to answer, but my throat felt tight. Instead, I traced a line on the bench's wood with my finger. The grain was rough, splintered. "You make it sound like that's nothing," I said after a while. She turned her head and our eyes met. It was the longest she'd looked at me without retreating. There was something raw in it, something I'd only glimpsed in fragments before. "You don't understand," she whispered. "If people knew—" "I don't care what people know." The words slipped out sharper than I meant. That made her flinch, like I'd tugged at a thread she was trying hard to hold together. The silence after was heavier than anything we'd shared yet. My chest ached with it, the weight of all the things I wanted to say but couldn't. She folded her hands, then unfolded them, then stilled them again. Finally, she said, "I used to think loneliness was safer, cleaner. But then you—" She stopped. The sentence hung there, unfinished, trembling. I leaned in without meaning to, pulled toward her voice, toward the fragile edge of whatever she almost confessed. Her breath caught, and for a second, it felt like the world tilted forward with us. And then she stood. Not suddenly, but deliberately. She smoothed her coat, pressed her palms against her thighs like steadying herself. "We should—" Her voice faltered, then steadied. "We should leave it here." But she didn't move. Not yet. We stood facing each other in the quiet, every unspoken thing humming in the air. My hand almost lifted. Hers almost reached back. Almost. For a few days she wasn't at the cafe. No paperback left behind. No mug turning in her hands. No glance through the steam. Just the chair by the window empty, like she'd never sat there at all. I told myself it didn't matter. People get busy. People disappear for a while. But the truth pressed in harder than I wanted to admit. I lingered longer over burnt coffee, checking the door each time it opened. On the 4th morning, I gave up and left early. Outside, rain was breaking against the sidewalk. I pulled up my hood and then froze. She was across the street, locking her car. Her posture was different, stiffer. She spotted me, and for a second her face softened, but she looked away too quickly. "You've been gone," I said before I could stop myself. "Had things to do." Her tone was even clipped. I wanted to ask what things, but something in her voice warned me not to. Instead, I just nodded, shoving my hands deep into my pockets. Later that evening, I saw a man leaving her porch. Mid-40s, graying at the edges, carrying himself like someone who used to belong there. He handed her something. An envelope? A document? And she accepted it without meeting his eyes. I didn't mean to stare, but my light was on, and from the basement window I couldn't look away. When he finally walked down the steps, she lingered at the doorframe. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she shut the door softly, like closing it against more than just the night air. The thought settled heavy in me. Ex-husband. After that, she avoided me. Not openly. She still nodded when we passed, still smiled faintly if we both ended up at the same crosswalk. but her steps quickened, her words shortened. The space between us wasn't filled with silence anymore. It was filled with distance. I told myself not to push. She'd made it clear on that bench. We should leave it here. Maybe this was her way of proving it. But I couldn't stop replaying her unfinished sentence. But then you... It clung to me, a fragment without an ending. One night, I typed out a message. If you need space, I get it. Just, I hope you're okay. I stared at the words until the screen blurred. My thumb hovered over send. But I didn't. I deleted it. Then I typed again. I don't know what you want me to be. Again, I let it sit there glowing against the dark. Again, I didn't send. The cursor blinked. The apartment was too quiet. Upstairs, her light turned off. The next morning, her chair at the cafe was still empty. I sat with my coffee, folding and unfolding the same napkin until it tore in half. When I finally left, I walked past her house. I slowed at the steps, thinking maybe I'd knock. But I didn't. I kept walking. It was late, the kind of night when the street lamps hummed louder than traffic. I'd just come back from the laundromat, arms full of warm clothes, when I saw her sitting on her front steps. No book, no phone, just her, hunched forward, elbows on her knees, staring at the ground like it might answer something. I stopped halfway up my own path. For a moment, I thought about going inside, pretending not to notice. But then she looked up. The tiredness in her face cut through me. "You're late," she said softly. "Laundry," I muttered, lifting the bag like proof. She nodded, then looked away. The silence between us stretched until it wasn't silence anymore, just the sound of my pulse in my ears. I crossed the street. Up close, she looked older than she had in the cafe or under the awning. Not in years, but in weight, like she'd been carrying too much too long. I set the bag down and sat beside her. The step was cold through my jeans, the air damp with leftover rain. For a while, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, "He came by." I didn't ask who. I already knew. "My ex," she clarified anyway. Her fingers twisted the hem of her sleeve. "He wanted to talk about selling the house. Said I should stop clinging to old things." She gave a small laugh, brittle and sharp. "Funny, isn't it? He leaves, and I'm the one accused of holding on." I wanted to reach for her hand. Instead, I picked at a crack in the step. "Do you want to sell?" Her jaw tightened. "I don't know what I want." Then, after a pause, "Accept this, whatever this is with you. I shouldn't want that. But I do." The words hit harder than I was ready for. My breath caught, shallow. "You think I don't feel it too?" My voice came out rougher than I meant. She turned then, eyes locking on mine. There was no guard in them this time. No careful wall. Just fear and longing and something like surrender. "You're too young," she murmured. "And you're not," I asked, half smiling, half breaking. Her laugh was shaky, but real. She pressed her palms against her thighs like she could push herself back into control. "If this goes wrong, it ruins everything." The quiet that followed felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. One step forward and nothing would ever be the same. I leaned closer, not touching, just letting the closeness speak. "If it goes right?" I asked. Her breath trembled. She didn't answer, but she didn't move away either. In the end, it wasn't dramatic. No kiss stolen, no promises made. Just her hand finding mine on the step, tentative at first, then steady. We sat like that, our fingers laced, saying nothing. And for once, nothing felt like enough. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. There was no sudden declaration. No morning where everything turned clear. Instead, it was slow, like water finding the cracks, seeping in, making a home where it shouldn't have fit, and yet somehow did. Weeks passed. She still sat by the cafe window, paperback open, coffee black. Only now, sometimes, I sat across from her instead of 2 tables away. Not every day. Some mornings she read alone, and I left her to it. Other mornings, she'd look up when I walked in and nudge the chair across from her with her foot, the smallest invitation. 8:47 a.m. became hours. Not every day, not always spoken, but enough that I started noticing the clock more than the burnt coffee. The bench outside her house didn't fix itself, but we learned to share it. Some evenings I'd find her there after work, the gate still stubborn, the air still holding the smell of rain. She'd slide over, and I'd sit, our knees brushing in a way that no longer startled us. Sometimes we talked about books, about her stubborn ex, about the small things I never thought anyone would care to hear. Sometimes we said nothing at all, and the silence felt whole instead of empty. The tea in my basement never improved. Too weak, too bitter. She always teased me for it. So eventually she started bringing her own thermos. Green tea perfectly steeped. Just in case, she'd say, pouring some into my chipped mug. It became a kind of language. The way she handed me the thermos without asking. The way I pretended to complain, then drank it anyway. It wasn't perfect. She still pulled back some days, retreating into her house with the blinds drawn. I still found myself staring at unsent texts, wondering if I was pushing too hard, if I was enough for her. But over time, the edges softened. My light was still on late, hers still flicked off earlier. Yet sometimes, between those hours, she'd knock softly on my door. No explanations, just a quiet, steady presence. One night, months later, we sat on her porch during another rainstorm. The sound drummed heavy on the roof, the same as that first day we shared an awning. She reached for my hand without hesitation this time. We didn't talk about where it was going or what it meant. We didn't need to. She just said, "Funny, isn't it?" What is? That after everything, the only thing that feels steady is this. Her thumb brushed over my knuckles, and I understood. No grand ending. No fireworks. Just her hand in mine, her thermos warm against the step, the clock inside ticking toward 8:47. Something earned. Something real. Something quietly ours. Sparkles, did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?